Dear reader, forgive me if my words seem heavy. I'm not writing this to seek pity. This is an assignment from my therapist, to try to release the pain I've carried inside for so long. I was told it could be the first step toward healing. I don't know where to begin. But perhaps I'll start with the most painful, the memories of my father. My father used to throw dishes at us. To this day, I flinch at the sound of plates. I flinch when someone slams a cupboard door, even if it's just someone accidentally closing a drawer in the kitchen. My body is already bracing for an attack. It's not just fear, it's physical. My palms start to sweat. My shoulders rise to my ears. And when someone places dishes too loudly in the sink, I stop breathing. Instantly. As if that sound could determine whether I live or die. Years have passed since I lived in that house. I've moved 3 times, changed the furniture, the wallpaper, even the smell in the hallway is completely different. But the past, like old dust, has sunk deep into my skin. But my nervous system still thinks I'm 13. That age when you start to understand things, but still depend on people who can shatter you with a single glance. My body still behaves like I'm that girl who's afraid to sneeze too loudly. If I hear a man's voice outside the door, especially if it's sharp, tense, my body reacts faster than my mind. What I remember most is that mug, blue, with a chipped rim. My sister and I always argued over it. It was the biggest one. That day, she grabbed it first. She was pouring herself some cocoa. And then our father came home. I don't even remember what made him so angry. Maybe the mess in the kitchen. Maybe the TV was too loud. Or maybe just our existence. He snatched the mug from her hands and hurled it at the wall, right next to her face. The porcelain shattered. One shard scratched her cheek. I screamed. Mom ran in. And do you know what she said? She looked at the wall, then at us, as if assessing the damage. And then she said it, almost in a whisper, tired, like she already knew we wouldn't argue. He's just tired, he didn't mean it. Her voice was empty, like even she didn't believe it, but said it anyway, because she had to. That's when the gaslighting began. Or maybe it started earlier. Maybe it began when I first noticed how Mom would fall silent when he walked into the room. How she made sure everything was in its place, the curtains straight, and that we didn't breathe too loudly. When she'd say, "Don't make your father angry," I treated it like a survival manual. Don't stomp. Don't crunch. Don't you dare laugh out loud, because even laughter could set him off. Or when she'd frantically clean before he got home, as if a storm was coming. The floors would shine, the pots gleamed like display pieces, and my sister and I would freeze. In a corner, on the couch, anywhere we wouldn't be seen. It wasn't preparation for dinner. It was preparation for invasion. But after the mug, something broke in me. It wasn't just the fear. It was the silence. The refusal to name what was happening. That was the scariest part. That no one said, "He's dangerous." No one screamed. No one stood up for us. Everyone pretended nothing happened. They repainted the walls, threw away the mug. My sister stayed quiet about the scratch. No trace remained, except for the hum inside, like everything around me was fake. She wore a Band-Aid and said, "It's fine." But I stopped believing those words. That's when I started developing my own rituals, quiet, invisible ones. I lined up the forks perfectly, stacked the towels into even piles. I thought if everything was flawless, he wouldn't explode. I aligned the dishes to the millimeter, wiped every surface until it gleamed. I scrubbed the sink like my life depended on it. Grease from a pan felt like a threat. Even dust could trigger a scream. And every time I froze when I heard his car pull up to the house. I lived in that house for 5 more years. 5 years where any day could start out fine and end in tears. I learned to read his mood by the way he walked, by how he placed his keys on the nightstand, by the look in his eyes. 5 years of plates flying past my head, doors slamming, and endless excuses. It didn't happen every day, and that made it worse. If he had screamed every day, it would have become predictable. But sometimes he was sweet for a whole week, and you let your guard down. And then, boom, out of nowhere. Like a knife in the back just when you'd finally started to breathe. Sometimes he was calm, even affectionate. He brought home pizza, called me sunshine. And then I'd spill juice by accident, and a plate would fly at me so fast I didn't have time to flinch. And every time, my mom would say, "He didn't mean to scare you." But he did. I saw it in his face, in the way he narrowed his eyes, the way his lips tightened. He enjoyed watching us flinch. Freeze. It wasn't a loss of control. It was control. That's the truth. He wanted us to be afraid. He didn't throw things at random. He chose the moment. He looked you in the eyes, like a predator, and paused just long enough for the fear to sink in. And then he'd throw exactly when you were at your most vulnerable. He never threw things at my mother, only at us, the kids. And that was the clearest sign. He could control himself. He chose where to aim. I remember one time she was standing closer, and he still threw it at me. Threw her. He had control. You could see it. He held it together around other people. In public, he was friendly, smiling, never raised his voice. He simply didn't want to hold back with us. With us, he let it all out, like we were his trash can, where he could dump his pain, his anger, his dissatisfaction, and he didn't care how it damaged us. People like to believe that abusive fathers are always drunk, sweaty, yelling men. Some kind of stereotype, a guy with a beer bottle and a stained tank top. It's easier that way, to think of evil as something distant, different, not like us. But mine was polished, clean-shaven, always smelled like aftershave, had a firm handshake and a smile the neighbors loved. He knew how to look right, worked at a bank, drove a decent car, went to church, put his hand on his heart during the anthem and shook the pastor's hand after the service, and then came home and threw shoes at the wall if we spoke too loudly. Everyone around said what a good man he was. Teachers, co-workers, neighbors. They looked at him with admiration. And if I ever hinted at tension at home, they'd say, "What are you talking about? You have such a great dad." They didn't see what we saw. They didn't hear his heavy breathing as he stormed through the house. Didn't see the shadow he cast on the floor before he entered the room. Didn't know that everything in that house breathed fear. Like the time he smashed a wooden mop on the floor inches from my feet, just because I forgot to unload the dishwasher. Or when he locked my sister in the garage in December because she was being dramatic. I used to cry in the shower. It was the only corner of the house where no one could hear me. Under the sound of water, I finally let myself exhale. Sometimes I stood there for 40 minutes, until the hot water ran out. It was the only place that felt safe. I'd lock the door, even if no one was home, because something inside still whispered, "What if someone comes in?" Starts yelling, blaming, accusing. I'd turn the water as hot as I could stand, sit down on the floor, and cry. I was never the favorite child. That was my brother. He was cheerful, loud, confident. Even when he messed up, he was forgiven. People ruffled his hair, joked with him, but I was the one who always got questioned. He could get away with anything. Being late, lying, being rude, it didn't matter. But when I even hinted that it was unfair, my mom would sigh and say, "Well, he's a boy. If he skipped school, boys will be boys." But if I was 10 minutes late, I'd get interrogated. They'd look at me like I was already guilty, just because I wasn't him. If I forgot to text that I'd arrived somewhere safely, I was irresponsible and disrespectful. Her tone cut like a knife. She didn't yell, but her words hit harder. After that, I'd double and triple check my messages, just to avoid that cold disappointment in her voice. The favoritism was painfully obvious, especially on holidays. He'd get the gifts he dreamed of. Me? Something practical. He was served first, praised in front of guests. I was corrected. And the worst part? Mom took part in it. She didn't just stay silent, she upheld the system, where I was always the one in the wrong, as if it was convenient to have someone to blame. She'd say, "Why can't you be more like your brother?" Every time I was tired or crying or just being myself. I began to hate everything I did. Tried to copy him, but it only made things worse, even when she saw what he did. She saw him lie, snap, manipulate. But she closed her eyes. It was easier to believe that I was the problem than to admit she wasn't protecting me. He once shoved me so hard I hit my head against the wall. I told her. My ears were ringing. I couldn't think straight. But I walked up to her, hoping, just hoping, for neutrality. All I got was a cold stare. She said, "You provoked him." And in that moment, I knew, even if he hit me again, she'd find a way to excuse it. Because blaming me was easier than admitting she failed to keep me safe. I never felt safe. Not once. I remember coming home from school with stomach pain from anxiety. Opening the front door felt like stepping into a minefield. Would it be quiet? Would there be yelling? Who was going to cry today? Every day was a lottery. Sometimes things were calm. Other times it started with a plate and ended in sobs behind a closed door. My sister and I would look at each other, and without saying a word, we'd know. Today it's me, or today it's you. You don't even realize what it's doing to you until you finally leave. When you live in it every day, it just feels normal. You think morning anxiety is just how everyone feels. You think the trembling in your voice when you hear a man's footsteps behind you is just part of your personality. But even when I moved out at 19, I didn't escape. I packed my boxes, exhaled at the door of my new place. But inside, nothing had changed. My hands still trembled when I heard a bang from the apartment next door. And at night, I startled at the sound of my own footsteps. The trauma came with me. It was like a thin layer under the skin. Invisible, but always felt. In the way I set a cup down so it wouldn't make a sound. In the way I apologized 20 times in a row, even when I wasn't at fault. It followed me into every apartment, every job. Even in friendly environments, I felt like I was sitting on a powder keg. I checked messages 5 times over to make sure I didn't offend a boss. I was afraid to ask questions. Every relationship. First date. And I was already analyzing. Is he getting irritated when I talk too long? Does my voice annoy him? I trained myself to anticipate anger before it appeared. My first boyfriend told me I flinched like a skittish deer. He said it with a smile, half joking, but I clenched inside. I didn't know how to explain that it wasn't a quirk. It was learned survival. He'd drop his keys on the table, and I'd already be tense. I'd say I was just nervous. It was easier, safer. But the truth was, I had post-traumatic stress disorder. I wasn't diagnosed in a military hospital, but every night my body screamed, "Hide." I lived like danger was always near. Because of my own family. Not because of a car crash. Not because of an assault. Because of the people who were supposed to be my shelter. My home. They were my war. I didn't even know it was possible. I thought PTSD was for soldiers, or for victims of crime. I pictured battlefields, sirens, explosions, but mine was dinner forks flying into the wall, and my mother's whisper, "Be quiet." But emotional abuse doesn't care about your income bracket. It can live behind any fence, in a house with a jacuzzi or a freshly renovated apartment. It doesn't leave bruises you can point to. It leaves shadows inside you. The yelling, the manipulation, the constant devaluation. It leaves marks. Not on your skin, but in your behavior, in your eyes, in the way you constantly ask, "Are you mad at me? Are we okay?" Even when there's no reason to ask. It just doesn't show up on an X-ray. No doctor will say, "You've got a constant fear of being abandoned inside you." But it's there. It pulses in your temples when someone raises their voice just slightly. And you know what finally broke me? Not the plates, not the yelling, not the pain in my body. It was that moment. When you're already grown, you've gotten out, you've survived. And he shows up smiling, like nothing ever happened. When my dad came to my graduation, I saw him in the stands, pressed shirt, same calculated smile as always. He waved at me like he was proud, and everything inside me froze. He handed me a card with a check, smiled like it was just any other day. My friends stood nearby, and I caught their confused glances. No one understood why I held that card like it was something foreign. His smile was for everyone else. He didn't even look me in the eyes. I brought up therapy once, just once. And he said I was exaggerating and disrespecting my parents. He said, "You don't appreciate how hard I worked for this family." His voice was firm, restrained, the exact tone he always used to end any argument. And in that moment, I understood. He still believed he gave us everything. When all we ever wanted was for him not to break us, I wanted to scream. The words were lodged in my throat, a lump in my chest. I wanted to say, "You destroyed us." Wanted to slam the table, rip the mask off. But even then, I couldn't, because I was still afraid. So I nodded. Just like when I was a kid, when I couldn't argue, when I had to not provoke. And once again, I chose silence as a way to survive. Because even then, part of me still wanted his approval. Even after everything, I caught myself wishing he'd say, "You're strong. I'm proud of you." But he never did. And I still waited. That's what a toxic family does to you. It rewires you, changes your internal settings until you can no longer tell the difference between love and fear, care and control. You start living as if love equals pain. And that's just how it is. You begin to think it's your fault. You beg for love from the very people who break you. You reach out to them, make excuses for them, look for reasons to justify them, even as you lie in pieces, because you believe if I just earn it, they'll love me. And every time you're left empty-handed. I only realized it at 25. Until then, I was living on autopilot, work, meetups, familiar cycles of pain. And then something inside me clicked. I'm not living. I'm hiding. I was standing in a supermarket when someone dropped a shelf full of ceramic bowls. They crashed to the floor, sharp, loud like a gunshot. That high, shattering sound. And I froze. Not just startled, I couldn't move, even though my brain was screaming. It's just dishes, it's just a store. You're an adult, you're safe. But my body didn't listen. It went right back there. To that kitchen. My breath caught, my vision dimmed. I crouched down by the freezer, not caring what anyone thought. My head spun. My knees buckled. It wasn't fear. It was a flashback. I crouched beside the freezer and whispered to myself, "You're safe. This isn't that house. You're okay." I said it over and over, barely audible. As if I wasn't just trying to calm myself now, but also the girl I once was. The one no one ever told those words when she needed them most. That's when I knew. I needed help. Not a chat with a friend, not motivational quotes on Instagram, but real, professional, difficult work with everything I had buried for years. I couldn't keep pretending I was fine. So I went to therapy. At first, I was terrified. I didn't even know where to begin. I sat there twisting a ring on my finger, scared to say it out loud. My father used to throw dishes at us. It took me 3 tries to find the right therapist. The first 2 tried to minimize or redirect. But the third, she just listened. Didn't interrupt. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty for my emotions. She saved me. Not in a day, Not with a magic phrase, but by giving me permission to exist, to feel, to say no, to cry, to be silent, to live. She helped me name the things I was afraid to. Before that, everything inside me was blurred. Just, something's wrong. Just, everything's too hard. But when she said those words out loud, I felt something inside me shift into place. Emotional abuse. I didn't even know you could call it that. I thought it was just a strict father, but it was a form of destruction. Slow, constant, invisible. Psychological trauma. No bruises, no scars, but you can't fall asleep because some part of you is always on alert. You don't know how to trust. You don't know how to love without fear. Favoritism. When one child gets warmth, praise, protection, and the other gets guilt. I grew up believing I was worse by default, simply because I was born the wrong child. Toxic family patterns, where no one talks about feelings, where love equals fear, and care means control. Where resentment piles up but is never acknowledged. Where pain is passed down like an heirloom. I finally admitted. I was the scapegoat. I always felt like whatever happened, it would somehow be my fault. But only in therapy did I understand. It was a whole system. They made me the one responsible for everything they refused to face in themselves. They criticized me, blamed me, shamed me, for the things they didn't want to examine in their own lives, for their anger, for their exhaustion, for their internal wounds, the ones they never admitted existed. I became their dumping ground. It was easier to unload it all on me than to confront their own reflections. I began reading about emotional neglect from parents, about how children grow up in homes where they're simply not heard, about families where the daughter is always the problem and the son is the golden child, about mothers who protect tyrant fathers, who are afraid themselves but pretend that this is just how life works, who turn away instead of stepping in to protect, about girls who grow up never knowing what it feels like to be truly loved. When I love you is said only after a fight, or not said at all. When you grow up thinking love has to be earned, begged for, suffered through. And most importantly, about how healing is possible. This is not a life sentence. Even if you grew up in a house where love was absent, you can still learn to love yourself. There's nothing to fix. There's only what needs to be understood. And let go. It's not fast, but it's possible. Every small step is a way back to yourself. To stop apologizing 100 times. To buy yourself a beautiful mug. To sleep peacefully and without flinching at every sound. I stopped going home for the holidays. At first, it was terrifying. I felt like a traitor. But then it got easier. Easier to breathe within my own walls, without the crushing expectations and forced smiles around the table. I stopped answering the messages. To, "You could have at least," and "Aren't you ashamed?" I no longer replied. I don't owe anyone my comfort. I don't owe anyone my suffering. I chose myself. I created a new home. Small, quiet, where I arranged the furniture the way I wanted. Where I could laugh out loud, cry without fear, and leave the dishes undone if I was tired. Where nothing flies at the walls. Where the sound of a spoon dropping is just a spoon, not the beginning of a nightmare. Where a wall is just a wall, not a target for someone's rage. Where my body can finally relax. I'm learning to trust space again, to yawn without covering my mouth in shame, to fall asleep without anxiety, to walk through the house in socks without worrying that someone might explode. I even started using ceramic mugs again. For a long time, I avoided them. I was afraid of the sound, afraid that if I dropped one, I'd freeze in panic, like I did as a child. For years, I drank only from metal thermoses, terrified of the crash of porcelain shattering. Now I have a blue mug. It's not exactly the same, but there's something familiar in it. I hold it in my hands and realize my fingers don't tremble anymore. I can pour coffee into it and just exist. It's not the same one. but it's close. And that feels symbolic. I can't change the past. But I can choose how I live now. This mug isn't about pain. It's about the fact that I survived. I drink coffee from it every morning, in quiet, in peace. No tense pauses, no footsteps in the hallway, no fear. Just me, the morning, and this mug. And maybe, for the first time in my life, a sense of calm. My sister and I still talk. She has kids now. She says, I try not to yell. I don't want to repeat it. She says it while holding her youngest daughter close, stroking her hair. And in her eyes, I see fear. Not of her children, but of becoming someone she refuses to be. And I believe her. I see how hard she tries. How every day, through the exhaustion, she chooses to be a different kind of mother. She came out of that same darkness, and now we're both learning, step by step, how to love, without hurting. And our father, he still sends cards, still acts like he was strict but fair. Maybe one day I'll say it all to him, look him in the eyes and speak every word out loud. You scared us. You broke us. I was afraid to come home. Maybe, but not for him. For me. But for now, I don't want to see him. Dear reader, if you are a father, please choose love over control. Life is too short to live it in fear, never knowing what true, warm, unconditional love feels like. Let your children feel loved, not broken. That's what matters most.